Okay, the last time I talked about this, I was looking at the valve lash, checking the valve lash, and what I think was going on was, what I thought was going on was that maybe the valve lash was too tight and the valves weren't closing, and that's why I had low compression here. But after looking at them all, some of them were a little out of spec, they were a little tight. But after I read about, the way to do it, you get in the tool and trying to find those valve shims, I decided to forget about that. I'm just going to try to get it running the way it is so I can decide how much time and money I want to invest in this thing. So I just put the valves back together. The valve covers, put them back on. And I had already had the carbs rebuilt before that. So I put the carbs back on. Now, before I rebuilt the carbs, I could get it to run on the right rear cylinder, and that's it. And now that I look back, I think the only reason I was able to run it on that right rear cylinder was because I think the carb was probably leaking internally. And I see that it still might be leaking. I think I might have to check the float on that thing or something. Yeah, that left rear carb looks like it's leaking. And I think, oh, wait a minute. Yeah, did I say the right rear carb was the only one running? It's the left rear carb, left rear cylinder was the only thing that was running. And I have a feeling it ran because something internally was leaking, because none of the other cylinders were firing. Actually, I checked the spark, and it looked like there was spark on all 4 of them. So I concentrated on the carbs. Although before I did the carbs, I did a timing check. I checked the timing with this clamp-on timing light from, what was that, from Kmart back in the 70s or something when I was a teenager. That thing works great though. But anyway, I hook this clamp up to the spark plug number 1, and then check the timing down here at this hole. There's a marker in there, and that was good. Then I checked it for number 2 cylinder, and it looked like it was jumping all over the place. It would never land in the same spot. I don't know what the heck it was doing. It was firing. There was spark, but it wasn't at the right time, is what I'm thinking. So what I did then was started reading up on the coil packs in here that trigger the TCI, the transistor controlled ignition. And the way they told me to, the manual says that to check it, you pull this connector here apart. It goes from the TCI box to this connector, and then down and around in your stator cover. That's where the coil packs are. So the the factory manual says to check the orange wire as common, and then you check from common to each of the other 4 wires, and it should read 110 ohms, because there's 2 coil packs with two coils in each one for each cylinder. But then I got online and somebody said there's another mistake in the manual, and they're saying that the ground was common, which would make a lot of sense. Most electronics, ground is black. Black is common. Did I say ground? Anyway, so when I checked it the first way, before I knew that it was the black that was being ground and not orange, I thought I had a bad coil. So I took the stator off, took the coils out, which was a huge job because they used red Loctite, and I was narfing up the screws, the Phillips head screws. I don't know why they use Phillips head screws in half these things, but they do. So I had to heat up the bolts, and in the process of heating up the bolts with a heat gun, I was cooking some of the plastic on the coil packs. But luckily, after I did all that and replaced it, then I read that you're supposed to use the black as a common and not the orange. So then after I checked it that way, the coil packs were good. So then I suspected that since this number 2 cylinder was erratic as far as the spark, I figured something must be wrong with my TCI box. And then luckily, this is before they started potting all the electronic boards inside with that compound. You can't mess with any of the components. But this, you can take this apart. It's not sealed very well, which is part of the reason they have so many problems with them from what I'm reading. Water gets in there because they're not sealed very well. They're not like the new stuff that's all just one brick of plastic with epoxy and that's it, you know. This one you can actually take apart. It's a pain in the ass though, because you gotta unsolder the connector wires from the board. And I have a feeling that what was going on was the board was messed up. There was one resistor that I think was disconnected, and it just looked kind of generally crappy in there. There had been water in there, and it made it look in worse condition because they put some other goop in there that started turning all funky and shriveling up and turning brown. I don't know. It just made it look worse than it really was. But I resoldered a lot of joints that I thought, you know, could be bad from vibration. Sometimes you don't see hairline cracks. And I resoldered all the connector joints. But then when I fired it up, it would only run in the high revolutions. It wouldn't idle. So I was scratching my head for a while. I'll be back. So when it did start running at the high RPMs, it seemed like all 4 cylinders were firing now, but I couldn't let it idle, and I couldn't run it. I couldn't let it idle that high. So back to the drawing board with the carbs. I took those apart, and I know the first time I took them apart, I noticed that the pilot jets seemed awful small. I've rebuilt a lot of carburetors for different size motorcycles, and I got a familiarity with, you know, the size of the pilot holes and the main jets for whatever size engine you're running and how many carburetors you got. So anyway, it just seemed like it was running way too lean, not enough gas to get anything going. It would backfire and puff and stuff like that. So took the carbs apart, took the pilot jets out, and I happen to have a couple pilot jets. And what's strange about this is that the pilot jets have the numbers on them that it calls for in the manual, and it calls for anywhere online that I looked. But I've got a couple pilot jets. I only got 2 of them that were 45s. What were supposed to be in these carbs were 42.5s. But the size of the hole was so different. I thought, well, these aren't even close. The size that were in this bike were like, it seemed like for a PW50 or something like that, real small, wouldn't let a lot of fuel in. So I took 2 of the jets I have, the 45s, which have a lot bigger hole for fuel for the idle circuit, and I put them in this cylinder, this carb, and over on the right front, the left rear and the right front. And after I did that, put the carbs back together, she starts up easy and she's smooth, but she's only running on 2 cylinders because this cylinder, the right rear and the left front still have the smaller jets, so they're hardly even firing. So I guess me taking apart the electrical, the TCI helped get the correct spark. I have a feeling they were just floating and they were just firing randomly from whatever. I don't know. I have a feeling something in there was not soldered together correctly. But it runs good now. I can start it up and probably won't even need the choke, I bet. But I still got to get 2 more. Well, actually, I got to get 4 of the correct pilot jets, and I'm going to have to take the carbs apart and redo it again. And we'll come back later. All right, let's see if we can get her fired up on 2 cylinders. running pretty smooth. I can't wait to get the other two pilot jets. Pretty good. Can't wait to get it on the road, baby. Well, too cold now, but oh well.